Section 18-3 is on kingdoms and domains, and what these notes do is they go through basically starting with the largest taxon to the smallest taxon, and then describing each of the different kingdoms that we classify organisms in. If you look at this table, you will see that this is how humans are classified. And the broadest category that humans go in is the domain Eukarya, and then we get smaller down to where the species is then sapien. This particular breakdown of classification of humans will be on a future worksheet that you may need to refer back to. So domain is, once again, the broadest, most inclusive taxon. And when we talk about inclusive, that means it includes everything. You may have heard of specific resorts that are in Mexico or the Caribbean or the Dominican, and they say they're all inclusive, which means everything is included. Your meals are included, your hotel is included, everything is included in that particular package. So under the umbrella of domain, everything beneath that or smaller than it is included in the domain. There are a total of 3 domains. Archaea and eubacteria are unicellular prokaryotes. So unicellular means single cell, and prokaryote, once again, just as a review, means no nucleus or no membrane-bound organelles, like a mitochondria or a Golgi apparatus or an endoplasmic reticulum. Those are not in prokaryotes. The third domain is Eukarya, and these are where the more complex organisms are placed. They have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. So the next couple of slides are going to go through just kind of giving you characteristics of each different grouping. So the archaea live in very harsh environments and may represent the first cells that have evolved. An example is this microscopic ancient bacteria. Where do we find these? Well, it said harsh environments. So you're going to find these types of bacteria in sewage treatment plants and thermal vents. Thermal vents are what bubbles out of the seams at the bottom of the ocean. Eubacteria, some of which cause human diseases, are present in almost all habitats on Earth. So these are the most common bacteria, or when we think of bacteria, this is the domain that they will fall under. E. coli, here's an example of a bacteria. E. coli lives both in your intestines, and it unfortunately can live outside of your intestines. This is a nasty bacteria if you ever come in contact with it. Many bacteria are important environmentally and commercially. For example, bacteria play a key role in making yogurts and other products that we use. The most common one is the domain Eukarya, which is divided into then specific kingdoms. The kingdoms are Protista, which include the protozoans and the algae, fungi, which include mushrooms and yeasts, plant, which are multicellular plants. The unicellular are going to be your algae, and finally Animalia, which are your multicellular animals. Once again, I'm just going to briefly go through each kingdom. So Protista, once again, they are almost all unicellular, meaning they are single-celled. Some are multicellular. Some are autotrophic, And if you recall, in an autotrophic, auto means they make their own food. And some are heterotrophic. Heterotrophic, once again, means that they have to get their food from someplace else. So an example of an autotrophic protista is going to be your algae, and a heterotrophic protista is going to be, it's another single-celled organism called a euglena, but they have to eat and they can also photosynthesize as well. Fungi. Fungi are all multicellular except for yeast. Yeast is unicellular. They are what are called absorptive heterotrophs. And what this means is they digest their food outside of their body and then take it in. So you're going to see a lot of these things, as you can see from the pictures, living on rotting and decaying substances and breaking things down. Fungi, their cell walls are made of chitin. Chitin is a carbohydrate that is very strong. Next are plants. Plants are also multicellular. They are also autotrophic, which means that they absorb sunlight to make glucose via photosynthesis. And their cell walls are made of cellulose. So fungi have chitin and plants have cellulose in their cell walls. The last kingdom is Animalia. And there's one barking right now that's not real happy. Animalia are multicellular organisms. They are ingestive heterotrophs, which mean that they consume their food and digest it inside of their bodies. And as far as Animalia go, they feed on both plants. They can feed on plants or animals. And in previous chapters, in the beginning of the year, we talked about the herbivores, the carnivores, and the omnivores, which fall into the kingdom Animalia. Taxon. Taxon is one of your vocabulary words. Most genera contain a number of similar species, with the exception of Homo, that only contain the modern humans. So genre falls under the genus, and after genus comes species. Classification is also based on evolutionary relationships between specific organisms, and we'll learn more about evolutionary relationships when we take the notes on section 18-2. We're kind of going out of order when we talk about cladograms. If you look at this particular diagram, you can see that it is broken down into the various kingdoms, and the Animalia kingdom, the majority of the group of organisms in there is going to be your insects. They are the largest grouping. Finally, a dichotomous key is what we use to identify an unknown organism. And you're going to be working with a dichotomous key, and you're also going to have to construct your own dichotomous key. So you need to kind of know how a dichotomous key works. Characteristics are always given in pairs when we're talking about a dichotomous key, so that's one key thing to remember. Characteristics are given in pairs. And when we actually read a dichotomous key, we need to distinguish between those pairs and then either move on to another set of characteristics, or we're able to identify an organism. The next slide is going to give you an example of a dichotomous key. So if we look at one of these unknown organisms that are off here to our right, for example, we look at this particular organism. When you are using a dichotomous key, you always start with number 1. And you will notice that in the dichotomous key, you have tentacles present and you have tentacles absent. So it's a similar trait and it comes in pairs. Your pairs are between present and then absent. So if we're looking at this particular organism over here, we do have tentacles because these are your tentacles. So if tentacles are present, we go to number 2. Number 2 says, notice it's in pairs again, either it has 8 tentacles or more than 8 tentacles. If we count them, we would see that there are more than 8 tentacles. So then we go on to 3A. Tentacles hang down, tentacles are upright. Well, here's the funny thing about this particular example. It's not even on the dichotomous key. So if I had done this for an assignment, this right here is what's called a hydra. And if you were grading me on my dichotomous key, you would realize my dichotomous key is wrong, and it does not work because there is no example on here that is for the hydra. So let's start all over again. Once again, you have to be very careful when you're constructing your dichotomous keys. So let's pick this one right down here. We're going to pick this one. Tentacles present, tentacles absent. Tentacles are present. We can see the tentacles right here. So tentacles are present, and if we look, it says go to number 2. We go to number 2, 8 tentacles, more than 8 tentacles. It has more than 8, so it says go to number 3. Tentacles hang down, or tentacles are upright. Tentacles are upright, so this then is your sea anemone. That's how a dichotomous key is supposed to correctly work. And that concludes the notes for section 18-3. As you can hear my dog eating through this lecture.